The Homestead Act of the 19th century and its influence on rural lands. Trina R. Williams Shanks. By 1853, the U.S. government possessed 1.5 billion acres of property, then commonly known as the public domain. This essentially included all land owned by the federal government and not a part of the original 13 states. Obtained through territorial acquisitions ranging from state cessions to the Louisiana Purchase and the Gadsden Purchase, U.S. Department of Interior, 1998, this largely undeveloped land was an important resource and potential source of wealth. The issue of how to distribute and administer this public land that formed a continuous strip of territory from east to west coast was an important policy question that had ramifications for how the country would grow and develop. There were differing philosophies as to how to best distribute land. Thomas Jefferson believed that economic democracy, including opportunities and resources for acquiring property, was the foundation of political democracy. Dorfman, 1940. He proposed that the United States, with a seemingly endless supply of available land, could best evolve as a nation of independent farmers and supported a policy of cheap land to attract foreign and domestic laborers to growing areas in the West and South. Gates, 1941. Jefferson died in 1826, 36 years before the actual Homestead Bill that embodied many of these principles passed. But incremental changes were made along the way to shift from typical sales of large tracts of land at high prices to the sale and distribution of smaller plots of land at reduced prices. Eventually, the Homestead Act allowed individuals who were willing to develop a plot of land over an extended time period to be granted full title to that land at no formal cost. Because the basic tenets endured for over 7 decades, the Homestead Act influenced many aspects of rural land use that still have implications for these areas today. This paper will briefly describe the Homestead Act, discuss its influences, both positive and negative, and then consider implications for rural development policy, examining in some detail this historical policy that provided an opportunity for ordinary citizens to obtain an asset that they could develop and use to create wealth, can hopefully provide insights for providing similar opportunities to citizens living in rural areas today. The Homestead Act was signed by Abraham Lincoln and passed into law in May of 1862. The statute provided that anyone who is head of a household, a military veteran, or over 21 years of age was entitled to 160 acres of unclaimed public land as long as they had not borne arms against the United States government. This allowed for single, unmarried women and men to be eligible as well as families. Applicants had to be U.S. citizens or at least have filed intention of becoming one. Once land had been surveyed and marked off into townships of 36 square miles as required by the Land Ordinance of 1785, a person could file an application with the appropriate land office swearing that the property was for one's own use with the purpose of cultivation and settlement. This person then had 6 months to move onto the land and begin improvements. The land was exempt from sale, taxes, or previous debt. Anytime after 5 years, the applicant was entitled to take out final papers and receive a patent, title, for the land. After providing evidence that all conditions had been fulfilled and paying nominal charges, around $10, to the appropriate land office. If the claimant abandoned the land or changed residence, the plot reverted back to the government. By electing to transfer property to individual citizens in this manner, the U.S. government offered a tangible asset that provided access to a well-established source of opportunity and wealth. Over the 77-year period, this act was in full effect, 1863-1939. 3 million people applied for homesteads, and almost 1.5 million households were given title to 246 million acres of land, U.S. Census Bureau, 1975. This represents a remarkable transfer of wealth and assets. Overall, approximately 20% of public land was given away to homesteaders, Dept of the Interior, 1998. Shanks, 2005, estimates that 46 million U.S. adults are descendants of homesteaders. This would equate to a quarter of the U.S. population in 2000. Although there were criticisms that much of the best agricultural land was already taken, that urban workers could not successfully move to farming, and that the opportunity was fraudulently exploited by corporate economic interests. Cochrane, 1993. The Homestead Act motivated many to move to largely unpopulated areas and establish family farms. Other historians have pointed out similar examples of fraud and speculation. Gates, 1941. The 5-year residency requirement emphasized the priority of long-term tenure and a commitment to sustained development over short-term speculation. In fact, minor adjustments were made to ensure protection of the environment and reduce the possibility of short-term stripping of minerals and resources. For example, when it appeared that forests were being harvested too quickly, some states created incentives for homesteaders to set aside part of their acreage to plant trees or required loggers to purchase land not settled according to the value of the timber it contained. Robbins, 1976. Although such laws were not always strictly enforced, the message was a priority for long-term investment. Even when special provisions were made in some areas for mining, cattle ranch grazing, and exceptional irrigation needs, this was usually determined by average rainfall and differential soil quality and not intended to shift the original commitment to agricultural cultivation. There are numerous historical accounts and multiple examples of how the U.S. government treated Indian tribes unfairly. One such example is the story of the Cupeño Trail of Tears. A small group that probably numbered between 500 and 750 in 1795 lived near established missions. As ranchers took over land in the area, the Indians began to work for them. In 1893, the Downey family acquired the property and sued for the removal of the Indians, a case which was eventually found in the family's favor by the Supreme Court. A commission chose an area in which to locate the tribe members. On May 12, 1903, the Indians were physically evicted and 25 families forced to leave. The group eventually migrated to Los Angeles, but still commemorates an annual observance of their removal. Another negative consequence of the Homestead Act is that for certain regions, such as the semi-arid areas of the Great Plains, the policies led to establishing farms that were probably too small to be viable over the long term. Hansen and Libicap, 2004, Libicap and Hansen, 2002. In most of these areas, initial settlement took place during periods of higher than normal rainfall, which gave the perception that homesteading could be viable and successful as it had been in states further east, in areas with higher levels of average rainfall. During periods of drought, however, many such farms failed and the homesteads were deserted. More successful strategies in these areas would be to have larger acreage so that some land could remain.